get started here and get going. I actually thought I was going to have a ton of people in person today here because we have Summit. And so my assumption was we got all these people that are going to be going to Summit and they will show up to class because we'll just leave and be done in time to go straight over to Summit. Boy, have I been surprised. I don't have one person standing in this room with me or sitting in this room even. I only have you guys on Zoom. So thank you, I guess, for being here on Zoom, but I'm shocked. I have nobody in person. Now, so here's what I am going to say though, is if possible, I'm going to beg and plead. I'll even get down on my knees if you guys want me to, although then you probably won't be able to see me on the screen. But that you show up on Thursday in person. That if you, now I know some are in St. George, so you're not gonna be able to do that. But if you are anywhere within a reasonable distance of the Union Park office, and I define reasonable as within an hour of here, please come and be in person on Thursday. It will make it a lot more fun, the class that we're gonna do on Thursday. You will enjoy it more if you're in person than if you're on Zoom. So I just, because we're going to be playing a game of Jeopardy and it just doesn't, I've tried it a number of times on Zoom and it just doesn't really work on Zoom. So be here in person. Now I know that there's some that can't, you know, like I say, there's some probably in St. George that are on here right now that you're not going to probably drive up, and that's fine. But if you can be here, just because it'll make it that much better of a class. So, all right, so we're going to jump right into it today because I need to get going so that we can be done in time to get over to Summit. So really, I want to be done by 11:15 so that there's enough time to travel. I am going to just
question for you. Are you waiting for other offers to come in? Is that the issue?
Feel free to unmute if you have questions, but just to keep the background noise down. So the other thing is for you guys, if you will go on to or into the chat box, put in your first and last name. And then if you have not given me your license number at least once in these 6 classes, or this is the 5th one, I guess. But if you have not given me your license number, put that down. And also at least one time wherever you put your license, also put the way your name shows on your real estate license so that I can give you guys credit. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna get my screen share going up here. So let me get this pulled up. Now I had, I think, attached a REPC to the information that I sent out yesterday in the email about the class. So hopefully everyone has gotten it. If for some reason you didn't, I will go and put one in the chat box here as well. To it here. So give me 1 second and I'll throw this in the chat box so that if you're on a computer, you could get to it as well. Okay, but I have it showing up here on the screen for you, so you should be able to see it on your screen on the screen share as well. Now, I have no one in the room, so I'm not going to worry about showing it to them. In fact, actually, ironically, I don't know if it's ironic, but funny, one of the thoughts that I had was that what I might do is if nobody showed up in person, that I was going to go in and just click on a video and start the video playing and then walk out and not be here and just let you guys watch a video. But I'm not going to do that to you, even though I thought about it for a minute. All right, so let's get going here. Now, typically what I would do is in this class, generally what I do is I've got this MLS printout here. And so I'm going to kind of show it to you for a minute. And if you had printed off one, then you have it, great. But kind of just take a minute and look at the information on here. This is a fake MLS that I created. And again, just as a reminder to you guys, there's nobody in the room with me. So I'm only talking to you guys on Zoom. So if you have questions or stuff, please unmute and ask the question, all right? But take a look at this fake MLS printout that I made and notice if there's anything on there that is of interest. I get somebody in person live. Hallelujah. All right. So, but what we're not going to do is typically, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to do this today. Typically what I would do is I would give you guys about 15 minutes to go through and look at the information that's on this MLS printout. And then from there, let me scroll down here, go through the real estate purchase contract and tell me the mistakes that were made. But in the interest of time, so that because we have a deadline that we have to be done for, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to just take you guys through this and we're just going to talk about it. So here's the idea of today. The REPC class that you did, I can't remember if it wasn't last week, I think it was the week before, with Rob Oakey, where he went through the real estate contract. So that one, the idea of that one was to explain the contract to you. The idea of today is more about how do you fill it out. And here's what I've found is that typically, especially with new agents, the thing that tends to hold them back from being productive and getting things going in their business is the fact that they don't, in real estate school, they didn't really teach you how to go through and fill out the purchase contract with a real potential buyer. Or if you're on the listing side, when you got it in, to know what to be looking for. And so what I've found is a lot of times what holds agents back is this fear of, well, somebody's going to ask me to help them write a contract. Do you want the lights on or off?
I always said.
Okay, well, I'll leave it on if you don't care. If you decide you want them off, get up and turn them off, or tell me. Okay, so here's the idea of what we're going to do is I'm going to take you through the process of filling this out. But I also want you guys to kind of look at it as we go through it and notice if you find any mistakes or any errors in it, okay? So I'll ask on each of the blank lines what you've noticed if there is an error, if there's not an error. So starting with this under this earnest money section here, and we're talking about this date here. So it says on this 9th day of October 2017, which is just the day that I created this fake reps. Typically, I would ask, do you see any problems with that? Well, and obviously the only problem is it was, 4 years ago. But outside of that, here's the main thing I want you to know on this, is you'll notice right off to the side here, it says offer reference date. So here's the important piece of this. When you're filling out the real estate purchase contract, you're going to put in a date here, and typically you're going to put it in as the date you're filling it out. But here's the key piece. Anything else that you do within this contract, any addendums that you do, it's going to ask for on an addendum the offer reference date. So the offer reference date that you're going to use, hey, it's a good thing that I almost, sorry guys on Zoom, I'm going to talk to these guys for a second. I almost, because I only had people on Zoom when I started, I told them I'm just going to start a video of the last time I taught this class and I'm just leaving. It's a good thing I didn't do that since you guys are here. But so anytime you're filling out an addendum, on the addendum, there's going to be a spot that asks for the contract that addendum is a part of. What was the offer reference date? And so the date that you put in right here is that offer reference date. So anytime you're filling out an addendum going forward after you've written a contract, this is the date that you're going to put in there. Now, the reason I say that is it's possible that your client tells you that they want you to write an offer for them, and you sit down and you write the offer and you send it over to them in .loop or DocuSign or whatever, and they just don't get to it and sign it until the next morning. Well, when they the next morning go sign it, then it's going to date it and timestamp it for the date that they actually sign it. Well, some agents then become like, well, what's the offer reference date? Is it the day I filled it out, or is it the day that they signed it? Well, this clears it up here is because it says on this 9th day of October, and then you have in parentheses offer reference date. Any addendums you do, you want to put this date on it because that's the offer reference date. Make sense? Okay. Next thing, yeah, go ahead.
Does the timestamp mean anything? Is that like,
Yeah, great question. So really the more so important about the timestamp being on there is going to be tied to when we send over the offer. In section 25 is the offer and time for acceptance. And it has a time in there that the offer is going good until, and then it would lapse after that. So when they timestamp it is showing that we did it before that date and time, or that it was done after that date.
so not necessarily like I guess your seller signing it, but it's for like the buyers who sign it for like a response deadline. Okay.
Yep.
So nothing for like the reference date. Like I said, like say I'm going to, or I just barely have like a buyer and I want under contract, or hopefully it'll be under contract here pretty soon. But I like filled it out last night and then he hasn't even signed it yet. So like.
Yep, that's exactly the scenario. So you going forward though, when on an addendum and ask for your offer reference date, it'll be the date you put right here, not when they signed it. Sweet, perfect. All right, next thing we've got in here, Billy Bob Buyer. So on that, we already talked about on the buyer packet class of what's the name we should put in there. And what we want it to be is we want the name on there to match how they applied for the loan. So whoever is going to be on the loan is the name that should go in here, and you want the name to match how they applied for the loan. Like I said, I think I said the other day, not that it makes that much of a difference, except for that the lender typically is going to want the name to match here to who is how they applied for the loan. So anyway, so that's what we want to be putting in here for the name on here. And so if it was a husband and a wife doing it, but it's only going to be the husband on the loan or only the wife on the loan, either way, that's the only name we want to put in. And occasionally somebody will say, well, but what if they did that and then they later on wanted to put their spouse on the property? Well, typically what you're going to do is just have just the person who's on the loan on here. And then after it funds and records, you can have the title company immediately record a quitclaim deed that puts the wife onto title, which is how most people will do it. So, all right. I'm going to go kind of fast, so stop me if I'm too fast. So the next, then, blank line is the name of the seller. Where do we get the name of the seller to put on here? Okay, good. So from the listing agent. So, or you could get it off the MLS, or you could go to the tax records. But here's what I usually recommend is I usually say, there's a few things you're going to want to call and talk to the listing agent about when you're writing an offer. And at one of those is, what do you want me to put on there as the name of the seller? And because sometimes they don't put it on the MLS. And I've seen scenarios where I've written an offer. I just went to the county records on the MLS, clicked on the tax ID, wrote down the name that was on the tax ID and submitted it. And then when the agent sent back a counter offer, they put a different name for who the seller was. So it wasn't correct on the tax ID. So that's why for me, I usually just say, call the seller or listing agent and just say, what do you want me to put for the name of the seller on this offer? Okay. All right, let's keep going here. So the next section down here is earnest money. It says that they agree to do earnest money in the amount of $1,000. Now, I'm going to ask you on this every time, do you have any concerns with how this is written out? And then I'll wait a second and see if anybody has any concerns. So any concerns with that?
No concerns, but so if we do earnest, like the electronic thing, I just put electronic transfer. Is that okay for that?
Perfect. Yeah, that's great.
Electronic transfer is good.
Yeah. Yeah. So so in this scenario, no concerns. They put down that it's going to be
a zeros. Those to the cents. You don't have the cents or commas if you want to be savvy, is what I'm told. Everyone's like, oh, don't put commas.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like everyone's telling me don't put commas, especially when you do what's it, section 2, like the new loan amount, and yeah, they're like, don't put any commas, don't put any like.
Why?
That is a great question. And I asked it too.
I've never heard that.
I asked it, I was like, is there a specific reason why? And they go, no, that's just like that's how they wanted to be filled out as professional. I'm like, okay, so yeah, maybe I'm talking to the wrong people.
Yeah, I've never heard that, so I don't know. I don't know where that came from. So okay, So $1,000 in the form of personal check and has a check number. So here's the key thing is just however you're going to be collecting the earnest money, just put that down there. I put in here the check number and stuff. And back in the day, it made sense of why I always didn't put the check number, because almost always we would collect earnest money and it was in the form of a personal check. And so we would always just put the check number on there. And I always said to do that because then the client, if you asked them what's the check number that you're going to give me, they don't know. They would have to go, I don't know, let me get my checkbook. And then they would fill out the earnest money and hand it to you. Today's world, we're using earnest or whatever, different strategies. And a lot of times people don't have a personal check even. And so here's the key thing. We don't want cash. And it's pretty rare that we're going to have them just wire us the earnest money. So because of the amount of wire fraud that goes on, we just typically are just not having them do a wire. So either have them go to their bank and get an official check or a cashier's check. They could get a money order, but we're not going to take cash, and we don't want to do a wire transfer. So you could use earnest though as well. Okay.
Earnest is so easy to.
Yeah, it is. All right, next line, offer to purchase. Any concerns on this section 1 here with the address or any of that? Here's the problem is, like I said, typically I start the class and say to you guys, okay, take 10 or 15 minutes and read through this and find the errors, comparing it to the MLS printout sheet. But since I didn't do that, let's see. Then I guess we'll just go. Okay. So no concerns on this one. It's just got the address of the property, the city, the county, the zip code, the tax ID number, everything's good there. All right. So again, here's the idea of today is more about how you fill it out. And so I'm going to skip over like section 1.1 where there's no boxes to check, nothing to fill out. I'm going to skip over it. But if you guys have questions on Zoom or here in person, whatever, just stop me and we'll talk about it. Otherwise, we'll just keep going. Okay. All right, next then, other included items. Any concerns on that?
You should be marking everything unless they specifically tell you you're taking it.
Okay, so yeah, nothing wrong with that to check it. Now, typically what will happen if I had you guys take the time to go back up here and look through this, what usually happens is, notice here it's got exclusions of range and refrigerator. But then as we come down here, we've checked the box for refrigerator. A lot of times when I say to people, any concerns with this, somebody will say, well, yeah, you've got down the refrigerators included, but the MLS says it's excluded. So which one's right? MLS says excluded. I've checked this box to say included.
Contract, so they're gonna look at.
Good, that's right. The contract always wins. Doesn't matter what the MLS says, it matters what the contract says.
And so like in this specific case too, it says range and refrigerators, you would have to put in other, you would have to put range, right? Because in section 1.1, it says it's already included, right?
Correct. Yep. Well, meaning if I was wanting to exclude it, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because I think like according to the listing, it says range and refrigerators.
Yeah, if I was going to exclude it, I would need to put it down here to
1.2.
Yeah, 3. To
Other
exclude.
include, okay.
Because yeah, these are all the included items. Yep. So here's the key thing though that I always want to point out is as you look at this, keep in mind that it says refrigerators, washers, dryers, microwave ovens, all plural. And sometimes what people will do is they'll put on the MLS, we'll include the refrigerator that's in the garage, or we'll include the refrigerator in the basement. But if the agent writing the offer checks this box and it says refrigerators, it includes all that are presently on the property, okay? So just to make sure you're aware on that, okay? All right. Go ahead.
The R and R not right under section, it's
Yep.
still 1.1.2. So what would you, like, what is something you would, is that an exclusion?
Good. So no, this is not, this is still the included items. So this R and R not box. So the good, that would be the next thing is we really should have checked either there are or there are not. So this would have been one of the things. So as, like I say, as we go through there, there's a ton of errors in this contract that I've filled out. And that's what I want to talk about. So on this one, yeah, there's nothing checked. There either are or there are not additional items of personal property that the buyer intends to acquire from the seller, okay? So what we need to do is if there were additional items, so for example, let's say that we wanted to ask for a hot tub or something like that, then we would want to check the box that there are additional items that are going to be purchased from the seller, basically. And you'll notice it says here, the additional items of personal property buyer intends to acquire from the seller at closing by separate written agreement. Okay. So basically what that's saying is there are additional items that we're going to get, but it's not part of this contract. It'll be under a separate bill of sale. So another example of that would be a property up in Park City that somebody's purchasing that is a condo that's used as a timeshare or something. Then that may be one where they're purchasing all of the furniture inside as well. If that's the case, we would check the R box and then purchase that on a separate bill of sale. Might be for $1 or something.
What about, so 1.2 in other, you click other and put hot tub.
So a lot of people do it that way, which is fine. But the only issue that you might have with it is sometimes the underwriter will come back and say, we don't want that included as part of that, so you need to remove it from the contract.
Yes, that was my question, is so that would be, because like if it's in other, they're like including that in the sale versus if you click R and you have a bill of sale.
You got
it's
a separate
separate
bill of sale.
Okay.
Yep.
So what would be something that would be like appropriate to put in other, like, I can't like think of anything. Like almost like sort of a fixture essentially. Like,
Yeah, I mean, that's the hard part.
like
is
a
you-
blender
you're-
maybe or
yeah.
something, because it's sort of a fixture, but not really.
It's not, yeah, it's
That
not
would be okay
really
to
a
be
fixture.
other.
But yeah, the other would just be, yeah, something else that, I don't know, because the interesting thing is technically, even the washer, dryer, the refrigerator, all of that stuff really
Should have those.
should be the separate bill of sale anyway, so.
I like the ease of that.
Yeah.
It's like gonna be in every transaction.
So kind of the idea, I guess, what I would say is the difference is, if you notice up here in 1.2, it says the following items that are presently owned and in place on the property have been left for the convenience of the parties and are also included in the sale. So like to some extent, they almost should strike this out and have it just be they've been left for the convenience.
Yeah.
Meaning there's no value to them and all those things.
Yeah, so I kind of like that too, because thinking like a hot tub's like what, $7,000 or something crazy like that. So that's gonna kind of affect the loan
Exactly.
versus like a blender that's like $20. That's not really gonna have like an effect on the value of the home. So I mean, think
Correct.
is that kind of thing that would be okay in other, blenders good, hot tub not okay.
That's probably how I would say to think about it. It's something that they may look at, they being the lender may look at as like, hey, I'm not giving you money to go get that type of stuff. We would want to do is that there are not. Cool. Okay. Next then, excluded items. So the only time you're going to really worry about listing something here, the way that I think about it is if it's something that I absolutely want to make sure that the seller takes with them. So let's say there's a swing set in the backyard and my seller's like, I don't want the swing, or buyer, I mean, my buyer's like, I don't want the swing set and I don't want to have to deal with getting rid of it. So I want the seller to get rid of it. I'm going to just list that in there as excluded. And so for me, I would put it as swing set, and then I would put and will be removed by the seller by closing or something like that. But if you're not worried about it, like if they were like, if they leave the swing set, fine. If they take it, I don't really care. Then I just wouldn't list it. So
Okay, on top of their exclusions in the listing. So like exclusions are already what the range in the refrigerator, so you put excluded items, range refrigerator, and then
Yep.
you wanted them to take this one.
Yep.
This one
I would
too.
put that as well. You got it. Yep. All right, next is water service. So this water service section is what it's saying is the purchase of the property will include any water shares or water rights associated with the property automatically. So you don't have to do anything, and it's going to include any water shares or water rights that are a legal source for the seller. If you're not wanting them, then you would want to list it down here. So let me give you an example of that. So I helped my sister sell a property that was up in Charleston, which is right by Heber, and or Midway, kind of Heber Midway-ish. And in the process of that, when she bought the house, it was on an acre of land. When she bought it, you had to have a water share in order to use water for that 1 acre. Well, during the time they owned it, the water company had then come through and put meters in. So you actually didn't need to have any water shares anymore because you could just pay for your water use because you now had a water meter. But the way it worked is she could use X amount of water, and then anything above that she would have to pay for. Well, when we listed the property for sale, my sister had explained that to me, and I said, well, let's do this then. Let's not include the water share as part of the sale of the property. And instead, we'll ask them if they want to buy it separately from the purchase because they don't need it because they could just use the water meter. So we get an offer in, and when we got the offer in, it was just like this. It had, nothing written on the line. Even though I had put on the MLS that the water share was not included, they could purchase it separately, which I'm all for that. Meaning if I was that agent writing the offer, I would have written it that way too, because if the listing agent doesn't catch it, then now the seller's obligated to include it. Well, we did catch it. And so I went back to them and said, hey, it's not going to be included. So I did a counter offer. Water share is not included, can be purchased separately from this transaction if they want to buy it. And the agent said, we'll let you know. Well, I told my sister, they're going to think about it. They'll let us know. Well, in the meantime, my sister starts talking to her neighbor, and the neighbor says, well, we'll buy it. And my sister said, okay, I'll sell it to you. Sells it to him. And then the buyers came back to us and said, okay, we want to buy that water share. And I said to my sister, okay, they want to buy it. Oh, well, I already sold it to the neighbor. And I was like, why? Why wouldn't you at least call me and say, hey, my neighbor wants to buy it. Call up the buyer and tell them if they want it, then they better, make an offer, whatever. Anyway, it ended up being fine. The transaction closed. But my point of the whole story is just when you're on the listing site, if they're not wanting it included, you got to remember this is saying that it will be included unless excluded and written on this line here. Yeah. So go ahead.
I have another and this is relevant with the offer app going on. Is there's a well on the property, and so I'm just when I'm on the phone, I'm like, hey, and I saw the wells on the property. Do you have all the documentation? Does he own the well? Is it rated or whatever? And she goes, oh yeah, I have no idea. I don't know anything. And I'm like, okay, it's part of the seller's disclosures. Are gonna need that. He's like, yeah, I'll look into it and I'll let you know. And then I call her today and saying oh, I didn't have time to get to it. Well, I mean, if it's and then the problem I'm foreseeing is because this just transfer, if there's any water shares, they transfer.
Yeah.
But say the well is not owned by the owner, it's someone else. What would happen in that case? So sure, we now have ownership of that well, but now there's gonna be some huge dispute of whoever random guy, hey, actually, I own the water. It's not the dude who sold it to you. It's my water.
Yeah.
What should I do now?
So yeah, so ultimately I would say as part of your due diligence, and if they can't get you an answer, extend it, is you need to know.
Well, and that's in the seller disclosure too, written in the list, it says when you need water rights and information about water rights. So can I just wait for the seller disclosure? If she doesn't include it, I'm like, hey, you're actually in breach because you didn't give me full seller disclosure.
Yeah, I would just say we need the information on what the scenario is on this. When we're purchasing this, are we also getting the water that goes with it?
I don't know if she would even put it on the MLS without that.
Yeah.
The well's in the backyard, some off well secretly hidden. It's just right there.
Yeah.
So
I don't get it either, but yeah, for sure, make sure you know, because it is possible that somebody else has the rights to the water, and so even though they've got the well sitting there, they can't use the water. So.
Yeah. If a lawsuit came up to that, we would essentially just sue the listing agent and the listing side, right? It's hey,
well, the seller.
You didn't have marketable title to even give us that water, but now we have title on it because according to this REPC, we have title, but you didn't have the authorization to even give it to us. So is that who would be at fault?
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, it would be the seller, but the risk that you would run a little bit is that as the buyer should have done their due diligence to find out who it is, you know what I mean? So based on everything you're telling me, it's kind of like, don't proceed if you don't know.
Yeah, don't sell disclosures and see if it's in there.
Yep. Okay. Next, so is purchase price. So the next section on this, the purchase price of the property is $247,000, and then it breaks down $1,000 earnest money, $238,355. Any concerns with how this is written up?
Let's see. My handy dandy. I already think there is. So what I'm looking at, don't even need the calculator. Yeah, it's wrong. For
The
sure.
numbers don't add up.
Good, awesome. That's exactly right. So here's the key thing on this. Here's what I'm seeing, and this is maybe just a pet peeve of my own. And so because I'm teaching the class, you get to hear my pet peeve, I guess. I don't know. But if you add those up, it adds up to more than, I think, if I remember right, 247,000. So here's the key thing. The reason I put that on there and I put it as, remember, I filled this out with mistakes intentionally so we could talk about them. But here's what I see agents doing all the time is they will put in the purchase price here of 247. They put in the earnest money, and then they put TBD here, and 247 here. Well, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we are being as detailed as possible on this whole process. And what I mean by that is, especially with the market that we have been in and that we're coming out of, there can be a lot of little things that could contribute. But
Sorry, totally interrupting you. Where should
just
this is your stuff?
Yeah.
Just don't forget it.
no, that's good. Thank you.
We can review when you get there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so here's the thing is I have had scenarios where I used to do a lot of bank-owned foreclosure properties. And I had scenarios the other way. Just trying to pull the door, like password. It's already closed. See, you guys that are on Zoom, you're missing all the fun, right? All right, so I have had scenarios though where for the bank, we would get an offer in, and there's two offers that are identical. But one of them has this filled out and shows a large down payment versus the other one just said TBD, TBD. And we went with the offer that gave us the more details. So here's the thing, like, I know that the way that this contract is written, it says right here that sections 2.1C and 2.1E may be adjusted as deemed necessary by the buyer and the lender. So basically what it's saying is this line here and this line here could be adjusted based on either what the buyer or the lender thinks they want to do. So it's just important to remember that even though, because of that, a lot of times people just put TBD. Well, we haven't decided yet. But the truth is usually it's just the age of being lazy is really what it boils down to. So for me, I'm just saying, don't be lazy. Put down what you think is going to be the thing that takes place, because it could be the difference of them accepting your offer over somebody else's if they're seeing it that way. So I've done scenarios where initially the buyer was like, I'm going to put down this large amount of money. Well, then after we got the property under contract, they then decided, well, hey, I actually am getting a better interest rate where that money's at. I'm going to do a loan as much as I can. And so they changed their mind, which is fine. And the contract allows for that. But I would say still put in your best guess as to what's going to happen. Meaning what I don't want you to hear from what I just said is write it up like they're going to put 50% down so your offer looks strong. And then you can always switch it. That's not what I'm saying. Put it as detailed as you can. Just know they can change it if they decide they want to do it different. Okay. All right, section 2.2. Any concerns in this one with checking the is not box?
Can you go back to 2.1?
Yeah, go back to 2.1.
So balance of purchase price at cash at settlement should be 7,645. Is that right? Or-
Yes.
So, and that's where you're accounting for the earnest money.
Yeah, so, yeah, sorry, I should have said that. So, yeah, typically what I did is a lot of times people will say, oh, we're gonna put, I don't remember if that was 3.5% or what, but we're gonna put that much as a down payment. And they're going, well, that's what my down payment's gonna be, and then $1,000 earnest money. But the earnest money will go towards that down payment or the balance of purchase price and cash itself. So,
At closing.
yep,
Even so, say there's no, like you put all. This is like just like a weird thing. It's probably like super simple. I'm just not thinking about it.
So, yeah.
So you put like this. You put $1,000 earnest money, but you put all the safeties in place. Like we get our earnest money after seller, after buyer diligence, after finance and appraisal, and then it closes. It just goes to the down payment, right?
correct.
Then if they cancel any time before, if it goes hard, they lose it. So like, and like that's pretty blatant. But like, then what's the real purpose of earnest money? Is it because like when you close, it's just like it doesn't help the seller whatsoever. It's just for like the only safety net would have to be in the contingencies that says like, hey, this is going hard at this deadline. That's like the only thing that benefits the seller, right?
Correct. Yeah, and in fact, for a lot of years, I even felt like, what's the point of us even doing earnest money?
Yeah.
Because
No one did hard earnest money.
nobody ever did hard earnest money. And not just that, but when we get to dates, I'll tell you the way that I structure them. And I typically am gonna structure them. Now, again, this is outside of a market where we're like, nope, you can just have the earnest money if we back out. But if you think about it, that's the intent of earnest money, is I'm so serious about it that if I back out, you can have the earnest money. And I think that's probably, if we went back in time, that's where it all started. But then somewhere along the way, somebody said, well, I shouldn't have to give it to you if there's a problem with the house though. And so thus the due diligence, the earnest money doesn't go hard till after that kind of stuff. So,
Which is written in there. It's like before, after due diligence, but before finance and appraisal deadline.
Yep.
I think there's like,
correct.
there's only one though.
Yep.
Is there another one that says before due diligence? I guess that would just be an addendum then.
Yeah, you'd have to do it.
And like answer my questions.
Good, yeah. All right, section 2.2, any concerns there? All right, no. So as long as, there's no concerns as long as the buyer doesn't have a property to sell. So here's the idea of where this section came from. The contract that we used before this one did not have this in here. And what would happen is a lot of times people would just not disclose that they had a property that they needed to sell. And they would just look at it as, well, we'll just cancel based on our finance and appraisal deadline if we can't get the property sold. So the state then added this section saying, is the buyer's ability to purchase, and get the loan referenced above, is it's basically subject to, or is the cash coming from the sale of another property? And then they either have to check it is or it's not, okay? So here's the key thing though. If you check the is box, I want to highlight this piece right here. If checked in the affirmative, meaning you checked yes or is, the terms of the attached subject to sale of buyer's property addendum apply. So what does that tell you if you check the is box?
A few sections down, you're gonna have to put there is an addendum.
Yeah, you're gonna have to attach an addendum that is subject to the sale of the buyer's property. So there are some agents that think, well, I checked the is box, that's good enough, I disclosed. But the contract says if you check the is box, you're also attaching this subject to the sale of the buyer's property addendum. Okay.
They should put that on the addendums, how there's like FHA, VA, like they should just slap that.
Yeah, they should. It would be good, actually. Well, in fact, actually, I think you technically, I've never thought about it before, but technically you probably don't even need to address it anywhere else, because by checking yes, the contract already says that it is attached. The terms of the attached subject to sale, so you don't even need to check a box anywhere else technically.
And I haven't read that addendum. Is that just a disclosure addendum pretty much?
No, it's basically saying that the buyer's offer is contingent upon them getting their property sold by a certain time.
Okay, but there's nothing like be filled out essentially on that. It's just, this is a disclosure to you.
No, you're filling it out. You have to put the address of the property. You have to put if it's listed or not. You're checking boxes that it's listed, it's under contract, or it's not.
So it's probably safe to just, do it all like check is, put there is addendums and.
Yeah, it would be safer.
Okay.
But I would say technically you wouldn't have to. All right, next page. Section 3.3, any concerns on asking for possession 24 hours after recording?
Depending on what the sellers and the buyers want.
Okay, good. So there's, yeah, no concern that way. Here's how I usually do it. And again, doesn't mean it's right. I'm just telling you how I typically do it. If the property is vacant, I'm gonna always check the box here for upon recording, if the property is vacant. If it's occupied, I usually will do 24 hours. I know one agent who will check the box and do either 3 calendar days after recording, or he'll check this and do 72 hours after recording. For a while there, that same agent would do like 7 days after recording was when possession was. And his thinking was that way it gives your seller plenty of time to get moved out.
Yeah.
So
That's like the double-edged suckiness. It's like, oh, sure, we moved on day 2, but
yep.
you're like moving in 5 days.
Yep.
Like, have fun with that.
So, and I know other agents though that always just check the box upon recording. And I think there's some advantages to that. So it kind of, to me, it depends on which side of the table you're sitting on. If I'm on the seller side, having 7 days would be awesome, because then you don't have to be in a rush and any of that. If I'm on the buy side, upon recording, the buyer wants them out as soon as they can so they can move in. So anyway, so just kind of just know you're gonna negotiate on that. But I personally just typically do 24 hours after recording is how I do it. Okay. All right, prorations. Down here under section 4.2, special assessments is just saying if there are any assessments for capital improvements that are approved by the HOA, that the sellers, how I've got it checked, will be responsible for that, pay for it. Okay. So again, the market we've been in, people are checking buyer will do it and all that kind of stuff. But I would just say as a general rule, as we get more back to a normal market, I typically am going to check the box for seller every time, because I want the seller being responsible for paying those kinds of things.
Are you expecting some people just to split? Because like I feel like split equally, especially like in the months of June and July, like that's pretty fair. Like obviously you want to, you're doing your fiduciary duty. Like, hey, I'm gonna put it on the seller first. See what they say. If they're okay with it, great. I did my job. But like, are you having problems if people put split equally, unless like your buyer specifically like, I'm not paying that. I'm definitely not paying that. Like,
No, I think whatever you decide to do is fine. The key thing to remember on this is for special assessments we're talking about.
yeah. Which
So-
I really would not want to pay as a buyer.
Yeah, wait, so, and that's just it, is here's how I usually think about it, is a lot of time, it kind of depends, I guess, let me say it that way. It kind of depends on what the assessment is, meaning, but usually what's happened is they've gone and put new roofs on.
Lights or roofs. Or
Yeah, something like that. And then they've just said, okay, there's now a special assessment to all the sellers. Well, if I'm representing the buyer, I kind of feel like at that point, well, the seller needs to pay for it. If it was something that was in process, I might feel more like what you're saying of, okay, well, let's split it, or
Like they're gonna, or it's like this is the sales happening this month and they're putting the roofs on
next month. Yeah, you might be like, no, if I'm the seller, I'm gonna be like, no, the buyer gets, I'm not gonna ever get a benefit from it, the buyer is. So
I'd probably still split equally.
Yeah.
Like,
there's not a right answer. So.
yeah. All right.
All right, next one down here is the HOA entity fees due upon the change of ownership. So this one's asking about, okay, in the event that there is a transfer fee or some type of reinvestment fee, who's gonna pay it? The belief out there is, and so I live in a PUD, so we have an HOA, and my wife is on the board for our HOA, and the belief within that board is the buyer pays it. So meaning like they've been talking about increasing that fee, and they did a little bit, but in the process of doing that, one of the things they said is, well, the neighbors the people living in the neighborhood shouldn't care because the buyer pays it anyway. And I told when my wife said that, I was like, oh, not when I write up a contract, I write it up that the seller's paying it. And so again, there's not a right answer on this. It's whatever you end up doing. But for me personally, I always check the seller box. Now, again, the market we've been in that we're somewhat starting to come out of a little bit, maybe I wouldn't have, maybe I would have said, okay, the buyer will be willing to pay it just because you want to get your offer accepted. But as a general rule, I always put seller on there. So,
In a normal market, but in
Yeah.
a market like this, it's typically gonna be the buyer. home.
yeah, with the market
it so
we've been
crazy?
in, it's with how crazy it's been.
Would you say it's
Maybe.
more dependent on the market than it is like the amount of the fees and stuff like that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I would. So, because like I say, for me, I've always checked the boxes, the seller will pay it. And
Like
and
5 years ago, you would have put seller,
Yeah.
but tomorrow you'd put buyer.
yeah, if I were writing an offer today, well, even today, let me rephrase that. Even today, even writing it today, which I did write one, I don't know, a week or so ago. And I still checked the seller box even, but part of that was the buyer that I wrote the offer for also had kind of said, yeah, if I get the property, I get it. If I don't, I don't. Well, in that scenario, then I'm like, okay, well, then I'm gonna write it up this way. If she would have been like, no, I want this house, let's do whatever we have to get it, I would have done buyer. But because she was like, if we get it, we get it. If we don't, we don't. So, and which, by the way, we weren't the highest offer price.
You got it?
I mean, we got it accepted. But part of the we got it accepted was because she didn't have a house to sell and the other person did. So,
So close.
yep. All right, next, confirmation of agency. Any concerns as you look at that you see? Should be at least one.
Buyer's broker does not represent anyone.
Good, that's it. Right here, for whatever reason, and I haven't seen it so much lately, but for a few years, what I would notice is that this box, this specific one, the rest of these would get checked, but for whatever reason, this one would never get checked. And I don't know what there was the issue with that. Usually what I determined, what I think it probably was that people were writing, using the MLS to fill out the contract. And I think it was an issue on the MLS that when you put an X in that box and then you hit tab, that it erased it for some reason, because I haven't seen it for a long time. But the point being, just make sure you're paying attention to who's representing who and you're checking the right boxes. Okay. All right. Next page, section 7, there's a spot for a blank line for other, which nothing really necessarily to address.
7.I, that's what I was talking about, the
Minutes of any waters.
underwater shows reference to section 1.4.
Oh, yes, correct.
For like my specific one.
Yep. Yeah, part of their due diligence or the seller disclosures to your buyer is to disclose any evidence of water shares or water rights. Yep. Good. All right. Section 8.1. Any concerns with checking the is box?
Typically what I do.
Yeah, so as a general rule, again, like I say, the market we've been through, it's not been uncommon for people to check is not on it to try to get their offers accepted. And that's fine, but just make sure that the buyers know that they can't cancel if they go find something later on.
Yes, and that's necessarily, so they can get an inspection, but whatever comes up in the inspection cannot be a reason for canceling.
Yep, that's what it is. So if you check is not, doesn't mean you can't do an inspection. You could still do one. It's just saying their obligation to purchase is not conditioned upon what you find.
But say, so you do this, you get an inspection, it's not conditioned upon it, you find something, and then you just wait for your, after that deadline, finance appraisal comes up, and you do have, is conditioned upon finance appraisal deadline, you just cancel the finance and appraisal deadline, like secretly being because you found something due diligence.
So yeah, that's a tough
It's
one
sole
to,
discretion.
but I was gonna say, the thing is I think how you would have to, here's for me, how I would have to say, I would justify it in my mind is I'm not willing to get a loan on a property that has that issue is more of how, meaning if you said I'm not buying it because of the issue, then technically you're not. Yeah, so here's the point. If you're, and actually this is a very, very good point to talk about right here. In the event that you checked is conditioned upon buyer's due diligence and you cancel based on due diligence, the very best thing for you to do when you cancel is to just tell them, we are canceling based upon section 8.1. Don't tell them we're canceling because of the wiring, we're canceling because of the hole in the floor, the whatever. Instead, we're canceling based on section 8.1. That's it. And if they say why, well, why are you canceling? Based on section 8.1. Because section 8.1 just basically says the buyer can cancel for any reason or no reason.
That's sole discretion too, right?
Yep. So the key thing though is, and so that same thing now then would apply to the finance and appraisal that you're talking about. Is if I'm going to cancel based on finance and appraisal, I'm going to say we're canceling based on section 8.3. Don't say, I wouldn't even say, well, I'm canceling because I found this problem during the inspection and
It's direct
I mean,
violation.
but I have an out by doing it based on the finance and appraisal. No, just I'm canceling based upon section 8.3.
Yeah, that's actually really cool. That's like, that gives you a lot of, because like agents who just aren't as versed, they're like, oh, they're leaving their due diligence. Like, that's a good one. So that's kind of a good way to get in, but.
Yeah, so people, I would say others are aware of it too, but I would just say, just keep in mind that especially anything you're gonna cancel on, like I said, even if it is on due diligence, just, we're canceling based on section 8.1. If you're canceling based on the appraisal, we're canceling based on 8.2, which, so let's talk about 8.2 for a minute. Because this one, what it's saying is the obligation to purchase is or is not conditioned upon the property appraising. Then down here, and this is the key thing I want to make sure you guys see on this. The buyer's right to cancel based on the appraisal says, if after the completion of appraisal by a licensed appraiser, buyer receives written notice from the lender or the appraiser that the property is appraised for less than the purchase price, buyer may cancel the REPC by providing written notice to the seller, and then notice as in parentheses, with a copy of the notice of appraised value. So if you're going to cancel based on 8.2, the appraisal, you not only have to give them notice, but you have to give them a copy of the notice of appraised value.
Is that just provided you by the appraiser?
So so it's either provided by the appraiser or the lender.
Okay, so you
But
can't
here's
just
the problem.
You can't just type in the lender said it valued at this and this. is what
Well,
it's like.
that's generally what happens though. When it doesn't appraise, is usually you just get a phone call that says it didn't appraise.
Yeah, because I mean, like by definition, like I am notifying you that the appraised value is less, so technically you're good, but.
But the contract says you have to give them a copy of the notice of appraised value. So here's the point, is if you get a phone call from the lender saying it didn't appraise and you're gonna cancel, they need to give you something in writing, which would then become the notice of appraised value. And it could be just an email that the property didn't appraise, it, appraised for this or whatever. So, okay. So if you are gonna cancel based on that, you need that. All right, section 8.3, you're either checking that there's no financing required or there is financing required. And then if it is financing required, all of the rest of this applies, which brings us down to the buyer's right to cancel, which we're going to say in the event that you cancel before the financing and appraisal deadline. So the buyer has the right to cancel based on due diligence before the finance and appraisal deadline, right? But this is saying if the buyer in the buyer's sole discretion is not satisfied with the terms of the loan, which that's where I was saying is if you're going to cancel, you're going to do it based on 8.3, then the buyer may, after due diligence referenced in 24B, cancel the REPC by providing written notice to the seller no later than the finance and appraisal deadline, whereupon X amount of dollars will be released to the seller. So here's the key. If you get before due diligence deadline, they can cancel, get all the earnest money back. If you're past the due diligence deadline, but before the finance and appraisal deadline, whatever amount you put in here is how much you're forfeiting of the earnest money. So let's just say it was a $2,000 earnest money and we had put $1,000 in here. And so now using your example that you brought up, Aiden, that it's after due diligence, but I found some stuff in the inspection that I wanted to cancel based upon. If it's written the way I have it written here, they get all the earnest money back. If they had put in $1,000 here and they canceled, you're losing $1,000. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
I just did that too. $1,000 or $1,500 earnest money, and then I put $500 to get back after due diligence to help them out. So.
Yeah. So for me, again, not necessarily the market we've been in and we're coming out of, but I almost always just put 0 there.
0.
That way
And
their
check.
earnest money, you still get it.
There's no checkbox on this.
No
It's-
checkbox for this section here.
But in the dot loop, there is one. It's, what is it? It's,
No, it should be just this with checkbox.
It's like on dot loop. So, I mean, I just opened it. I can't remember what the checkbox was.
I'll have to look back and see if something's changed then, but. All right, hopefully that all makes sense. Next,
Me too.
additional.
They don't have dot loop pulled up.
Oh, I thought somebody was interrupting to say something. so-
I heard it too.
Okay, additional earnest money. So this next section then is the additional earnest money. So this one would be just saying, if we don't cancel the contract based on 8.12 or 3, then no later than the due diligence deadline or the finance and appraisal, whichever is later, that there will be earnest money, additional earnest money deposited. So think of it as you're saying, not only am I not going to cancel, I'm now going to even give you more earnest money to show you that if I do come back and cancel, you get even more money.
This is, so I got me mixed up. That's a check.
Yeah, this is the one you're
Yeah,
throwing.
okay.
Okay, so on this one though, you've got the will or will not. Any concerns with how I filled that out?
Deliver, yeah, it said will not deliver, but then you put $500, so.
Exactly. So technically, probably would be nothing wrong with saying that. We will not give you an additional $500. But probably better if you're saying will not to just put 0, right? Okay. All right, section 9. Next section here is there either are or there are not additional addenda. Go ahead.
Question on that,
Yeah.
so let me read it. It's applicable then no later than diligence deadline. So there's no, it just, that additional earnest money has to be in our account before the finance and appraisal deadline.
It has, so no later than the due diligence or finance and appraisal deadline, whichever is later.
Typically finance and appraisal.
So typically it's going to be by the finance and appraisal deadline.
I was wondering if you had to put, there's like some kind of date or something, or. And then if it's not, or breach of
Then
contract.
you're in breach.
Okay.
All right, section 9. There either are, there are not. So I've checked there are. And this is where we were talking about earlier is technically if you had a property to sell, you wouldn't need to do this, but I still think it's a good idea to check the box here and put subject to the sale of the buyer's residence. There's also another addendum, which I didn't give you guys the time to go look at, that we should have checked the box here and put addendum 1 here as well. Okay. So that is one of the errors that on this contract that I did. So just, here's the point. Any addendums you're doing, make sure they are listed in the contract is kind of the point. Okay.
I have a question about that.
Go ahead.
So say you have 3 addendums you want to put on and they're not the ones already listed in addendum number, would you put addendum number 1 and 2 and 3?
Yep. I would.
And then what would be the purpose of the other?
So the other would be like what I was saying is you could use that as a subject to the sale of the buyer's residence addendum. Or
So
the short sale addendum, something like that.
are those already like numbered?
So they may be now, but it used to be that they weren't. And
Is
so
that why
that
it's
was
like
kind of
that?
the, what's that?
Is that why it's like that?
That's
Like,
why
say,
it's like
there's only 1 addendum, so you put addendum number 1.
Yes.
So that is the condition upon.
Subject to
them
selling
selling-
buyer's
yeah,
residence,
Yeah, and so you just would leave other blank, or would you put 1 other subject to sell?
So I wouldn't list it twice.
Okay, so as long as it's in like, it's listed somewhere
Correct.
on that, you're good?
Yeah, if there is a spot for an addendum number on it, which I don't remember if there is on the subject to the sale
Yeah.
anymore. Meaning there didn't used to be, if there is now. If there is, I probably would just check this and put 1 and have that be listed as addendum number
'Cause that's just a box you fill out, right? So when you open up that, you're like, this is addendum 1.
1,
and then
yep.
You've actually, you're addendum 1.
Yep.
Okay.
That's the key is I always just think about you, there's got to be a paper trail.
Okay,
The whole point of it is if somebody who didn't know what was going on got a copy of the contract, could they read through it and understand what's happening? That's kind of the main thing. Okay. All right, home warranty. So on this one, the way that I typically will fill it out is I will do there will be, it'll be ordered by the buyer, a company selected by the buyer, and the cost will be X, paid for by the seller. So that's how I typically write it up. But again, the current market we've been through, a lot of times people either just aren't getting one or they're checking buyer for all the above. Okay. All right. Next, let's keep going here. So we're gonna skip down to mediation, section 15. Any concerns there? There should be. There's nothing checked. So which one should be checked?
Whichever you feel like you want to do. For the most protection, you push out.
Okay, so here's how I always say to think about it, is that there's not a right answer. Should you do shall or should you do may? But what it boils down to is this, is explain to your client what it means. Shall means you absolutely have to do mediation first. Meaning if you tried to go to court, the first thing a judge is going to ask is, did you go to mediation? Because the contract says you will. So if you said shall, you have to do that, because if you got to court, a judge would say, well, go do mediation, then why are we even here? If you do may, then you get to decide. Now, so here's the challenge is, sometimes people will go, well, which one's better? Well, it kind of just depends. Because if you end up having a dispute over something small, you'll probably wish you had done may. If it's big, you'll probably wish you had done shall. So there's not a right answer to this.
What is mediation specific? Is that something you pay for?
Yes.
What is it? Like what happens?
So yeah, great question. So there are basically, typically it's somebody, it's an attorney
Yeah.
that has now going to specialize in mediation.
Okay.
And they
Just
offer
like
those
a law
services.
office?
Yeah, you would
Overview.
basically show up there and you pay, and they are going to sit down and they're going to try to just help the two parties work it out. You know, basically, typically what really happens though, before that even happens, generally what will happen is the brokerages will try to get together with, you know, the broker of each of the companies would get together with their clients there and basically sit down and go, so let's assume I was trying to do a mediation with you guys. I would be saying, all right, Hayden, like, what do you expect? What do you want out of this deal? And you're gonna go, well, this is what I want and blah, blah, blah. And I'm gonna go, okay, Abby, what do you want? And she's gonna tell me what she wants. And I'm gonna go, okay, well, what if he came up a little bit more on the price and you threw in the hot tub? Will that work? And
Just kind of negotiating back and forth.
yeah,
until
it's
you agree on
basically just a
something.
negotiation to try to get them to work it out.
This brings up another good question. Is there an official mediation? Because like I said, there could be like my broker is going to talk to my client, your broker talk to your client. Let's see if we can figure something out. If that doesn't work, let's go to legal mediation, or go talk to a lawyer or someone in court.
Well, so the key thing, if you look here in the contract, is it just says that the parties will meet with an impartial person who will help resolve the dispute informally and confidently.
Is a broker impartial?
Probably not.
Alright.
But like I say, a lot of times that's where it'll start though,
Yeah.
is because if we can try to work it out, there's no fees
Yeah,
involved
it's
that
totally
way.
free, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm assuming just meeting with the lawyer at all, they're gonna charge you a little bit.
They're gonna charge you to do it, yeah. Okay, so,
Alright, sweet.
good. All right, so there's not a right answer, but check one of the boxes, okay?
That's interesting then.
All right, keep going here. The other thing that I typically would have had you catch is that we didn't have any initials here, which is, I filled out this contract the way I did just to remind me certain things at certain times. So the key thing for me on this is before you send off the contract, if you're doing it through a dot loop or a DocuSign, check to make sure that you have all the spots set to receive initials and or signatures. If you're in person with them and they're filling it out, before they leave, just flip through each of the pages to make sure they didn't miss anything. Because a lot of times that's what will happen is you'll sit there and you'll be talking while they're initialing and somebody misses an initial and not that it's not something you can go back and get it, but it's just to save you the hassle of having to go back and get it is my reminder with this. All right,
It's not a fully executed contract then.
that's right. All right, section 24. So here's how we're going to do this, just to talk about. So in terms of filling this out, there are a lot of people who just say you should do 7, 14, 21, 28. Meaning like, look at a calendar and see what 7 days out is and put that date there. Look at a calendar and put whatever 14 days is here, 21 days here, and 28.
It's like a week for each.
And that's probably fine. I'll tell you how I do it. For me, clear back here in section 4, when we got to no, sorry, 3.3 possession. When we got to 3.3 in possession, I always ask my client, when do you want to move in? Once they tell me when they want to move in, then I'm going to structure all the dates based upon that. And what I mean by that is, let's say they wanted to move in this Saturday. Well, if they want to move in this Saturday or a month from now, but on a Saturday, I'm typically going to put my settlement deadline to be the Monday or the Tuesday before that Saturday. The reason I do that is there are times when there's going to be a hiccup. That meaning they go and sign, and a lot of times I'll hear agents say, well, if you sign today, you're getting your keys tomorrow. Well, most of the time that is true, but it's not always true. And so as a result of that, for me, I have found if they want to move in on Saturday, I usually will have them sign on a Monday or Tuesday. And the idea of it being just, is the buyer ever going to complain if you got them the keys before they wanted to move in?
No.
But are they ever going to complain if you tell them, hey, I know you're planning on moving in on Saturday, but it didn't fund and record, and therefore it's not going to until Monday, so you can't move until Tuesday?
So you're saying they want to move in Friday, you set settlement for like
The Monday
previous
before.
Monday, because why?
Or Tuesday, just because
Or like
typically,
Wednesday.
why not Wednesday?
Yeah.
So the only reason I typically, I mean, Wednesday could be fine, but the only reason I typically don't is because if you sign on Wednesday, it should fund and record on Thursday, but what if it doesn't? Well, then maybe hopefully Friday will work. But for me, I just would rather be safe than sorry. I would rather have those extra days to make sure. I've had times where it doesn't fund and record for 3 days. And
So, I'm pretty new, so I don't know like what's the reliability of. This is per county, I'm sure. Or per
well,
office.
pretty normal that it's gonna take place the next day. But just there are times that it doesn't. And so like I said, for me, I just always feel like if you do it on the Monday or the Tuesday, they're not gonna complain if on Wednesday you go, hey, here's your keys. I know you're not moving until Saturday, but they're gonna be okay.
And
You're always prepared for the worst case scenario, just in case.
Yep.
Not, even though it doesn't happen often.
Right.
exactly. And then from settlement to closing, that as well, settlements when everyone's signed and they submit everything. Does that typically take another like 2 days? Day and a
No,
half?
typically if you signed today, typically tomorrow it's gonna fund and record, generally. But the contract says it has to be within 4 days. That's really the reason that I do the Monday or Tuesday is because it could stretch out 4 days. Doesn't very often.
But
But
it's always good to.
it's always good to be prepared. Yep. Okay, so that's how I will do the settlement deadline. Is I'm usually gonna decide settlement deadline based on when they want to move in. Seller disclosure deadline, I usually, for me personally, I will put it 3 to 5 days out from the day that we're writing the offer. And the reason how I decide if it's 3 or 5 is if it's a pretty straightforward offer that's gonna get accepted, I want the seller disclosures within 3 days for me. If I feel like we might have to negotiate on this, we might go back and forth for a day or two, then I'll do it as a 5 day. Okay. So, and then due diligence deadline, I typically will do 10 to 14 days out from what the day that I'm writing the offer. What's that?
Hold on, need to write this down.
Okay.
So seller disclosure anywhere from
3 to 5 is usually what I do. And I'll just look at a calendar and the other reason I say 3 to 5 too is it depends on the day of the week we're writing the offer and stuff. Like I typically am like, I don't want to have to do stuff necessarily on a weekend. So for me, I'll try to structure it to where it's not going to fall on a weekend. Same with due diligence. So that's why when I say 10 to 14, somewhere in that range.
10 to 14.
Finance and appraisal. Now here's the one that's a little bit for me, how I'll tell you how I do it. Like, remember I said, a lot of times people do 7, 14, 21, 28, which is fine. You can do that. For me, I usually do it as whatever the settlement deadline was going to be. So let's say it was the Monday or the Tuesday. I'm probably going to put the finance and appraisal deadline to be the Friday before that. Because, and here's my thinking on it, is the lender has to give to the buyer their their disclosures 3 days before. So for me, I want my finance and appraisal deadline to be on that, whatever that 3rd day before is. Because if they don't get it to them, we're probably not signing on that other date. So I want to be able to go, oh, we're canceling, getting our earnest money back. See, if I'm representing the buyer, I want this finance and appraisal deadline to be as close to the settlement deadline as I can get it. If I'm on the seller side, I want it as far away from that as I can. But I'm on the buy side, I want it close. So that's how I do it. Is just, you can do the 7, 14, 21, 28 if you want. I usually just do it where I'm going to try to do it the other way. And then I rely on the other agent to try to catch it and change the dates. And most will not. Okay.
How much, what's the time limit from the start of when you go under contract for a finance and appraisal deadline? So it's like
So typically the lender's going to want 3 weeks.
3 weeks. So 21 days after.
Typically that's going to be what they want, which is why people usually do 7, 14, 21. Kind of thing. But if you're using Inspiro and you do the Everest Advantage, you don't need that much time. So
Was it like
I don't remember.
3 days?
Something like that, yeah.
4 days.
All right, next, offer and time for acceptance. So we put in here by 8 PM on October 10th. So here's how I do it. Here's the point of this. When I'm gonna write the offer, I already mentioned to you before, I'm gonna call the listing agent and I'm gonna say to the listing agent, I'm writing an offer. I should be able to get it to you within the next hour or two. How much time are you gonna need to get with your seller to get me a response? I always call and ask for how much time do you need? Because what I hate doing is sending it over and then them calling me and going, hey, we're not gonna be able to get an answer until tomorrow or whatever. And so for me, I would just rather not have to do additional addendums. And so I usually will call and just ask, how much time do you need? Make sense? All right. Next then is the FHA VA addendum. So I threw this in here just as a, because we put that it was an FHA loan. The errors that are on here, I'll just point it out to you. We didn't put the address in here, so make sure you put in the address there.
Sometimes Leap auto populates that specific thing. It does this, only the city. And
Yeah, that's why I threw that in there. Yep, is you want to catch that, because if it doesn't put it in, put in the address. All right, this section here is saying that any appraisal required repairs. So if the appraiser says they've got to make repairs, we're just pre-agreeing up front that the seller would be willing to spend up to this amount of dollars towards those repairs.
Is the FHA addendum?
Yep, the FHA addendum. Yep, correct. So,
And for a conventional loan, there is no requirements, right?
correct,
Okay. Same with the like USD and rural.
correct.
Okay, it's only FHA.
Yep. Well, so typically on a rural loan, they're gonna probably be at FHA though, so you probably still will need this.
Okay. Wait, for a rural development loan?
Yeah.
Isn't
I mean, check with the lender
Same
to
with
make
like
sure.
Utah
but-
housing.
Yeah,
it's an FHA.
Utah housing too, yep. All right, section 4 is how much the seller will agree to spend towards getting rid of termites, which we do have termites in Utah. Pretty rare that you'll see it and have an issue with it, but I usually just put $500 in there. And up on section 3, I usually am just looking at the safety of the property. If it's in good condition, I usually will just put $500. If it looks like, hey, it could use a new roof, I might throw $2,000 or $4,000 or something there, okay? Section 5 is how much you're asking the seller to pay towards the buyer's closing costs. So if you're asking them to pay closing costs, you would throw that in there. Again, the market we've been through last little bit, you're probably checking the seller won't contribute to anything. Yeah. All right. Next,
What is specifically closing costs?
what do you mean by that?
So closing costs are gonna be
Oh, the lender fees. Typically, it's all the fees that the lender is going to charge.
same with like.
But
titles
also-
too,
Yeah, and title, lender, title, fees.
escrow in
And-
California.
Mhm.
Okay. And that's
And
pretty much it, it's the escrow and, or title and
yeah,
lender fees, that's typically it.
yep.
Okay. What's the
So-
rough estimate for those? It's like super ballpark.
Yeah, it's typically close to 3%. It kind of depends on the loan amount.
Okay,
The higher the loan amount, the lower the percentage it's gonna be, because some of the costs are fixed,
yeah,
but some are dependent on the purchase price. So I usually, I mean, when you say ballpark, I just always say 3% is the ballpark of what they're gonna pay in lender fees and title, so.
That's on top of like, because I mean, closing costs is still technically, like your down payment sort of. And
Nope, down payment would not be part of closing costs.
They could bring that to closing, right?
Yeah, but it's not closing costs.
I think that's where I'm getting it, because
Yeah.
you bring it to closing.
You do bring
technically
it,
It's
but
closing costs,
Yeah,
but
it's not, it's down
Okay.
payment. So this defines it here as basically saying seller should contribute a settlement amount towards the payment of loan discount points or other loan and closing related costs. So. All right, last one here then is this addendum. And this is where I was saying, both on this one and the other one, it says that the purchase contract with an offer reference date of, that's where we kind of started it. Same thing on this FHAB addendum with an offer reference date of, so you're gonna put in that date there. And then here's the key thing on this one. So this one is just one that I had thrown in there. Seller to have the carpets professionally cleaned to remove the stinky, nasty smell of cat urine. But it said or cat urine, but of cat urine. Not probably a good idea to offend the seller is kind of the point. So here's the thing though. If you are going to be filling out an addendum, make sure it makes sense is the main thing I want to say. Make sure when you fill it out that it is something that somebody who doesn't know what you were thinking, if they read it, they would understand. Is kind of the key thing. So like on this one here, probably how it should be worded is seller to have the carpets professionally cleaned by a company approved by the buyer by such and such date, something like that, rather than, to get rid of the stinky smell, whatever. All right, any other questions? Oh, actually, one last thing, then I'll ask questions. Is you'll notice on here, we put 9 PM. So this one says 9 PM. This one back here said 8 PM. That says 8 PM. So is it 8 or 9 PM?
8. I remember.
This is one of these convoluted because this one's not even signed technically. So here's the thing. If there is ever, and here's my point that I wanted you guys to see, is this right here. Not that whole thing that's blue, but to the extent the terms of this addendum modify or conflict with any other provisions of the REPC, including all prior addenda and counteroffers, these terms shall control. So anytime you're doing an addendum, if they conflict or modify anything previous, that controls. If it's not addressed, then it's deemed that whatever was said before is good. Make sense? All right, any other questions? Okay, well, thanks for being here. So just a reminder again, Thursday is the Jeopardy game. Be here in person if you can. I know some of you are in St. George and you guys have the only excuse not to be here. Everybody else, be here in person. It'll be a lot more fun, I promise. Outside of that, see you at Summit here shortly.
Thursday for that one.
Thursday, yep.
You want these here?
Yeah, or you can keep it there.
Pile.
Yep.